Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriter's response. Ooh. One of my commenters left a response, and I cut and pasted it into a Word document so you can't see who it was. I don't want you to respond to this person or bother them in any way. I disagree with most of their points, but I thought I'd respond on a video. I thought their response was very polite, so kudos to you for being polite, even if we don't see eye to eye. So this was a comment on one of my Hollywoke Hot Take live. I think it's one of the recent ones. And this person starts. This ended up being much longer than I expected. Apologies in advance. It's your time, buddy. Disclaimer, I consider myself a leftist, which will color my read on this subject. Okay. I respect that. This person is admitting their biases up front, and that's fine. I probably won't agree with them, but continuing, sorry to burst the bubble. You were doing so well up to that point. Now you're being smug, but you're a leftist, so I guess we'll have to deal with some smugness. Sorry to burst this bubble, but the term woke is already political. Yeah. I'm not sure what I said on that live stream. I talk a lot on the live stream, so if you're nailing me on something I said and the wording of it or whatever, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but I'm pretty up on the term woke. I watched like a million James Lindsay videos. He's pretty much drilled down in it. It's very political. Yes, the term is very political, being woke. Continuing, we've got presidential campaigns in the U.S. with key platform points on, quote, ending wokeness. Yeah, I totally agree with those. And I think you're referring to DeSantis mostly. Trump kind of was ahead of the curve on that. Looking to, doesn't really use the term as much. DeSantis is more in the realm of, speaking that way. Most of the other guys, not so much. They sort of pick and choose like a buffet what part of the leftist agenda they're looking to terminate, if they actually are going to do that at all. Continuing, unfortunately, everything is political, and unfortunately, it always has been. That's a very leftist view, leftist dude. I don't believe that. And this is where I think your argument kind of goes off the rails, because it's, well, everything's political, therefore I'm right. Or truth is subjective, which will probably be the next thing you say if you respond to this video at all. Truth is not subjective, and everything is not political. It's just not. I have a dog. My dog is not political. Well, Joan is. Okay, Joan's a poor example. She hates communists, but like a rock isn't political. A chair isn't political. There's lots of not political things. There are TV shows and movies that aren't political. Yes, if you stretch the definitions to the point of breaking point and say, well, because there's this person or that person, and the history of humanity is behind it, therefore I guess you can make that rather weak argument, but no, not everything is political. I don't agree with any of your premise, but let's continue. Things don't suddenly get political. The politics have always existed, but when we were younger, it flew over our heads unnoticed, plus the Hollywood politics were much less visible before the internet gave everyone a megaphone. I would agree with the latter part of that statement, yes. Less visible. In terms of everything was always political, but we just didn't notice. Some of that's true. But look, if you're going to say everything was political, well, I mean, politics is a cyclical system. So you're just in the cycle, and you're just part of that cycle, which will never come to an end. So your point then is kind of meaningless if it'll never come to an end and it just keeps rotating on, and you're just tribaling it up on one side. What difference does it make then? You know, you can say you have perspective, but you've already admitted you're a leftist, whatever that means to you. Also, continuing, also consider rules like the Hays Code and the CCA and the precedent they set for decades even after they were lifted. The wokeness had to be actively suppressed because Congress threatened to legislate those industries, quite politically, dare I say, if they didn't self-regulate and cut down on moral indecency and degeneracy, which was really just people trying to write stories outside the narrow purview of Christian acceptability standards. Well, you got a lot going on this these couple of sentences. First off, you're already now at the point in your little screed here. I don't mean that as a negative comment. I mean, I make screeds all the time. But you're playing around with the term woke. You're not really defining it, I would say. And now you're basically implying that what wokeness means really are just people trying to express themselves outside some sort of Christian orthodoxy that you imagine was imposed in the past. And when you put moral indecency and degeneracy in quotes, I have to think that you don't really believe there is such a thing as moral indecency or degeneracy. There was a time when I was very much on the left that I might have sort of agreed with you, at least surface wise. But now I couldn't disagree more. There are indecent and degenerate things. I never thought I'd live to see them, especially on a place like the internet, which is so public. But my God, man, have you seen the internet? There's a lot of indecent and degenerate things going on. I won't go through them here, mostly because YouTube would ban me and not the actual degenerates. So, yeah, there should be rules against moral indecency and degeneracy. And I would rather have those rules defined outside of government than within government. I would rather not the government decide what is moral and decent, because they're terrible and they're not very moral or decent, and there's lots of degenerates in that crop. I think you can agree with that. So, I'm glad they kind of self-regulated. Was that perfect? No, but looking back on it, and I don't know how old you are. I'm going to assume you're young because you're a leftist. I'm 57. Back in the 80s, we had the Satanic Panic. And that was BS. I mean, it was just usually a bunch of kids going into the woods or finding an abandoned building and pretending like they were Satanists. Maybe there was a handful of them that actually kind of had some connection to the Church of Satan. It was just to outrage people, draw attention to themselves. This is what teenagers do. Heavy metal, Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, it's all satanic. And yes, some of the people on the other side of that were religious moralists, you would say. People who wanted to take it way past just, hey, we gotta lock down this, we gotta get church back in the schools and blah blah blah. But most people were just looking at that like, well, that doesn't seem very good. Teenagers go into an abandoned building and vandalizing it and writing all these things, that doesn't seem very good. I don't think most people wanted to, indoctrinate those kids into Christian some sort of Christian re-education camp. But I think if you were a parent in that era, you might want to sit your kid down and go, hey, what's going on here? Like, I come from a very large family. My family would have been like that if they caught me doing anything that was sort of like criminal and whacked out. And I can't remember a specific example with me per se, but you know, everybody in their teenage years does a bunch of stupid stuff, and hopefully someone sits you down and goes, hey, don't do this stupid stuff. It's not what you want to do. You're testing your limits or whatever. So some of it's that. Yeah, some of it's Christian moralism. The problem with leftists and the left is they don't want any rails. You know, they don't want any limits. So they say to those kids doing crazy things, oh, go do them. Go do a lot of them. Hey, help yourself to crazy things. Like, there are limits. You want to make sure your kids are safe. Oh, I could think of an example. So me and my friends one night, we went out, and for a while our thing was like getting into a car and driving around and, I don't know, honking at girls, and we'd steal like road signs, right? So one night we stole a flashing, one of those flashing things from a construction site, and we put it in my friend's bedroom, and he kept it for years until the battery died. But the night after we stole it, we realized, oh yeah, that was in front of all this lumber that was piled up in the middle of a roadway, and by taking that blinking sign thing away, somebody could have driven right into the damn thing. And it was probably not a good idea looking back on it. And of course, now that I'm older, I would never do that. So if my kid had done something like that, I would be like, you have to return that sign right now. And we'd go back and we'd return it. And I'd probably make them apologize to the construction people there if they were around or whatever. Possibly force them to make restitution, or tell them to spend a day on a construction site as some sort of punishment. Is that, I don't know, is that fighting moral indecency? Yeah, a little bit. Someone could have been hurt. And I could get into something much more darker, but I'm not going to do that on YouTube for, again, obvious reasons. There are reasons we have rules and regulations. You don't want people to get hurt, I assume. But leftists in general, I think, have this idea that, well, if everybody just got along and we had no rules, we'd all figure it out and it'd all be great. No, that's not the way human beings work. Kids will push and push their limits until someone says, hey, you're going to get hurt, or hey, you did get hurt. Now don't do that anymore. And you want to try to tell a kid before they get hurt or killed, you don't want to do these things. So, for instance, getting an operation because you believe you were born in the wrong body. That is something I don't believe children should do or make a decision on, for lots of reasons. Again, I'm not going to get too deep in it because it's YouTube. If you're an adult, that's a different story. You have the right to do what you want, even if it's really, really stupid. But I don't want to get. Let's not get too into that. I'm getting off the rails here. Let's continue with your comment. Because you're more about movies anyway. I don't want to really watch movies, but it's not because they're woke. It's because all Hollywood blockbusters on some level must be engineered not to challenge anything about the status quo, but to appeal to the lowest common denominator to generate the highest return. I only wish that was true now. That was true, I think. These days, they are picking a very bizarre audience. Again, the classic demo was 18 to 35-year-old male. The reason they picked that is because that tended to be the guys who were dating. And they would take a date to the movies. They would choose the movies because guys tended to plan the date. And they're young enough that they're still dating, 18 to 35. Older than that, it was more likely they'd be married. Younger than that, they didn't have a car, couldn't get to the movies. So that was the key demo in movies for a long, long time. Now the new demo that I heard a few years back is 21 to 40 lesbian. Now, that's an audience, but that's a much smaller audience. That is not a broad audience. I don't know what percentage of women are gay. I've heard as high as 13% and as low as like 3, I think. That's not a lot of people, and that eliminates all the men, and it's just a very small portion of the women, nowhere close to the majority, and you can see that in the movies that have come out. You can see that in the girl boss stuff. You can see that in Barbie. A lot of resentment towards men, and it's not even that I think lesbians are on board with all those things. It's just the perception that Hollywood has of their audience, which is usually wrong anyway, even when they're kind of right. I mean, at least with the 1835-year-old male, it was such a broad audience. If they skewed it a little ways, one way or the other, it didn't really matter. But with this audience, man, it's a very small audience to begin with, and if you miss this tiny target, man, you're going to have a lot of bombs, Disney. I lost my place here. Oh, okay, continuing. Any boundaries they push on, it was focus group tested to make sure it wouldn't put too many people off watching it. That's true, but you assume that focus groups are effective. I've said time and time again, focus groups here's what I think a focus group can do. It can take a movie that's terrible, like unwatchable, and make it watchable. That's about it. They can't really do anything for a watchable movie. You focus test that, they say it's okay. They can, however, ruin a great movie as well. Because a great movie will, a lot of times, piss people off. And maybe later they realize, that was a good movie. But it made me mad because of this scene or whatever. Or it may piss off a minority of the audience that will be incredibly vocal. So, you don't want to listen to them either. So focus groups have a very limited use. So to give you an example, quite famously, Mel Brooks made Blazing Saddles, and the studio focus group tested it and gave him all these notes, and he just ignored them and released the movie anyway. Somehow he was allowed to do that, goes the story. And thank God he did, because it's one of the greatest comedies ever. Now imagine if he had even a focus group back then, I'm sure would have said, "Ooh, that was a little hard. Ooh, that was a little harsh." You know, comedy is meant to, good comedy anyway, is meant to outrage a little bit. They would blunt every good joke in that movie. They would have done it to Tropic Thunder if they allowed them. So does it happen? Yeah, it happens a lot in Hollywood, unfortunately. But it doesn't always happen. It depends on the project. It depends on the movie. It depends on the studio. You know, if it's an indie movie and it just hits big, a lot of times the studio's just going to be like, well, there's no sense in editing this. People are watching it. Even though that may have been a movie that if you had focus tested it, it would have gotten destroyed. And more and more, you have fewer and fewer movies that are escaping the focus group testing. But sometimes the focus group testing can kind of work. I guess the one time you might say focus testing worked, and it's a bit of a stretch, but in Clerks, famously, the original ending of Clerks was Dante gets killed not Dante, is it Dante? The guy with the beard, who's always complaining in the movie, I shouldn't have come in today, or it wasn't even my day to work. A guy comes in and robs him in the last scene and kills him. And that's sort of the ultimate, like, F you to the clerk. He's having the worst day ever. it was such a downer of an ending. Smith changed it. I think probably prompted by the studio. With oh God, what was the movie? There was a horror movie. They amped it up. They altered the special effects a little bit based on some audience perceptions. Not the Blair Witch. It was another one. Oh God, I can't. Paranormal Activity. Yeah. So sometimes a little tweaking won't hurt, or sometimes you could just use it as an excuse to fix a movie. Now, in the case of the Justice League, that was kind of a disaster. They tried to fix the movie, and it just, I don't know, I think they messed it up much worse. So, personally, I'm against focus groups. But they're not very effective. They're not very effective at pinpointing things like, the status quo. It's more effective to just blunt everything, because that's what you get. You get mediocrity by committee. And when you're talking about boundaries, what are you talking about? Like, when you say you're a leftist and you say boundaries to push back on, I think, well, you're going to just talk about nothing about the boundaries you're going to push on is capitalism, politics, gender, and id politics. There are some things you could maybe push back on in those realms, but there's other things to push back on too, and some of them are not political or not important at all. Pineapple on pizza. If I push back on that, I'm pushing back on it, saying that idiots put fruit on pizza, but it's not political. It's taste. It's personal taste. I didn't have a political agenda to talk about the toppings on my pizza. All right, continuing. Leftists are inherently anti-capitalist, leaning at minimum, and they are more likely to see Hollywood as a money grab. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think the problem with leftists and leftist narratives is they're so all over the map, you don't really have a sense of where leftists are. They're mostly, depending on how left they are. The further left you go, the more complainy you get, because that's been baked into the stew. The postmodernist and guys like Hegel, it all developed. You have to complain and tear down the state and tear down everything, and we're going to rebuild it and have a magic utopia that we imagine in our heads. That process consumes you, and you fail to see that there is no end to that process. You can literally endlessly complain about anything, and I have, because I'm a complainer. But if you don't stop and be satisfied with something, you will destroy everything. And unfortunately, that's where leftists are in the current paradigm. They're tearing down everything. Now, you might consider yourself a moderate leftist. Oh, we just want to tear down certain institutions that are bad and keep the good ones. You'll never be able to do that, because as you already know, being a leftist means you're in a circular firing squad. No one's left enough. There's always going to be a guy in your group who's even more left than you and says, no, you're being anti-racist, but you're not being anti-racist enough. You're being woke, but you're not being woke enough. You're being feminist, but you'll never be feminist enough. Not for these people, not for the one guy in your group who's the most left. So you'll always be dragged into this purity spiral that never ends. Whereas people on the right, if they stick to their tradition, have objective metrics from which to judge people and say, no, you're going too far. Why are you going too far? Well, here, it says right in the Constitution. Or it says right here in the Bible. Or it says right here, because we've always done it this way. Leftists don't have that. And that's why they spiral and spiral and spiral until you either quit being a leftist or you destroy yourself and find some other new way to blame people, I guess. Being anti-capitalist is just woke-tarded. I mean, you're just dumb. I mean, I'm not trying to insult you, but my God, man, capitalism is literally everywhere. You have no means to replace it with anything else. It will always exist. So even if you win the magic revolution that's never going to happen, and everybody goes back to zero, and everybody's even, and finds equity, and there's no racism, and there's no sexism, and everybody can now go farm in a zero green or carbon neutral environment, you will still have people engaging in capitalism because people want stuff, and they want things, and they want girls and sex, and they want a better car, and they want a better tractor, or they want a better hand hoe to work in the fields, comrade. Capitalism will never stop, because that would mean you would never trade with anybody. And everybody would do their own thing, make their own clothes, make their own food. And I suspect, since you're a leftist, you can barely make your own food. I'm joking, relax. So, I mean, there's a simple solution if you want to be a commie. Go to North Korea. Enjoy. Continuing. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of Hollywood being a money grab, well, it is show business, but there's a difference between movies that are good and movies that are just a money grab. Yeah, some sequels, they're just total money grabs, like, why did you even make this sequel? It sucks. And other movies, they're good. Continuing. As a result, it's much harder for marketers to reliably appeal to them without alienating the lowest common denominator. Oh, they've done that quite a bit in recent history. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but I mean, again, they are on a completely different audience now. I mean, who the hell wants to see Snow White and the 7 magical beings? No one wants to see that crap, in my view. No one wants to see a lot of these movies. There's no audience for it, or like a tiny audience, literally an audience of the people who made the show. Who the hell was She-Hulk for? It wasn't for the comic fans, I'll tell you that. I was a fan of She-Hulk. I know what the comic is. That show was for no one but the writers who wrote it. And, yeah, so you're talking about the lowest common denominator. I only wish they went back to the lowest common denominator. Then we'd be back at variety shows, which I mostly hated, but at least there'd be one comedy sketch I'd probably get behind. Advertisers still try to pander via progressive messaging regardless, and it often flops because leftists are less likely to buy it, even though they might tacitly support said progressive messaging. Well, I think, again, leftists, you have no money. You have even less money than I do, and that's saying something. So you don't buy anything, really. As far as the tacitly support progressive messaging, yeah, until something else sets you off. This is the problem with being a leftist. You're never woke enough. Bud Light couldn't be woke enough. And you can argue, oh, yeah, they went back on their promise or whatever. Okay. You're just expecting the perfect, I guess, multinational corporation, beer corporation, to come out, create a beer that's going to be woke as F and super popular. And what? It's free? I mean, like, you have these insanely high, unrealistic expectations. That's the problem with leftism. You expect perfection. And when you don't get it, you criticize mercilessly. And because that's what you do. You're indoctrinated to keep criticizing. Tear away the bad. Tear it away. Well, you did pretty good, Bud Light, using Dylan Mulvaney, but you didn't use all the guys from the RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, the insanity of leftism is well known. If you're a leftism, get out. You're in a cult. And yeah, catering to leftism, whether you're doing something in Hollywood or a product, is a nightmare because all they do is complain. And we've been crowing about this on Twitter all day long. As a leftist, most leftists don't have to buy a product to support whatever virtue signaling thing they perceive as being good. So when Dylan Mulvaney came out, at first everybody was like, oh, the leftists were on Twitter going, oh, this is so wonderful. How could you attack this poor woman? And then, as Budweiser scrambled to try to save their beer company, rather than, I don't know, save Bud Light and say, no, progressives, we'll save it. We'll be partners with Bud Light. You're doing the right thing, at least partly. And no, you criticize them too, until finally Leftist even said, oh, we're not going to drink you either. Which left Bud Light in a very interesting position. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if you progressively message. That only appeals to, that only works for, say, surface level progressives who are very fickle. They're the same wine moms who used to wear yellow ribbons back in the 2000s and say, you got to support the troops. What are you, some sort of commie? We have to fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. Yeah, they're the same people. You just don't see it. You're probably not old enough. Continuing. It's absolutely possible to pull off, and you see it in some popularity of Barbie. You're saying the progressive messaging. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I think, again, Barbie was kind of an event movie for the same kind of clout chasers that have been chasing all this stuff for the last few years. Barbie became the next thing. And lucky for the Warner Brothers. And it became a fun thing to go out with your friends and go drinking and then go see Barbie and wear pink and then go out afterwards. And I don't think they care about this movie at all, or the messaging, or what. I mean, some people do, but I don't think very many people who actually like this movie care about it. They cared that they could clout chase, go on Twitter and say, we went to see Barbie, did you? That's what they care about. Because it was mostly aimed at women, and most women are utterly obsessed with their own image, unfortunately. It's something that's deeply ingrained in women, because they need to present well in order to get a boyfriend. Because men are more visual, so they're very image conscious. So they get pulled down these various rabbit holes of late of trying to look like a good person and trying to do the right thing. And so the advertisers tap into that. They don't actually care about the product. Some of the people who worked on this movie either pretend to care really hard, or, that's been their career. Personally, I think the whole Barbie mess is just stupid. I wouldn't see the movie. I wouldn't give it my money. I might watch it on Max. If people are still talking about it by the time it hits Max, and give my review. But there's been endless analysis of the movie. So from the studio's perspective, it's a hit. It doesn't matter why it's a hit. As long as people go see it, it makes $1 billion. Mission accomplished. Continuing, for leftists, though, the production has to walk the progressive walk and talk progressive talk, or it will just get ignored or canceled. Of course, this happens in slightly different ways across the political spectrum, but I touched on leftism because of your stream topic. No, I disagree with that. For most progressives, especially women, it just has to talk the talk. That's it. It just has to have that air. Barbie has that air. Regardless of what it is, doesn't really matter. I mean, I think it's incredibly anti-capitalist and communist. It sounds to me, at least the one clip I watched, God. So, with that message at its core, the girls who went to see it and wore pink and had pink drinks and had parties and got to post pictures on Instagram, they don't care about what the movie is. They care about the intention they got for go seeing it. That's it. And most progressives are like that, because most progressives are women. It tends to be a female thing, because it's partly their nurturing nature. Women are nurturing, and they want everybody to get along. It's like when your mom says, "Oh, get along. Everybody get along. I want everybody to have a good time and sit there and eat the same things, and we'll all have a nice time." And that's fine for your mom to say stuff like that, but that may not actually happen. And sometimes mom just has to accept that. And when it comes to a movie, in terms of being canceled, the left cancels people. The right, it's not cancel culture. It's not the same. What the right did with Bud Light is not canceling. They didn't destroy Bud Light by going after them for something, that it's not like they didn't drink Bud Light. They just stopped drinking it. They just stopped ordering it. That's not canceling. Canceling is when you get somebody online and say, "Oh, get that guy fired. That guy shouldn't be alive. That guy should be ousted. He should never be allowed to make a beer or allowed to make a record or a TV show or whatever." That's canceling. Nobody on the right cares if you make a beer and nobody drinks it. That's your problem. You can go make all the beer you want. If other people want to drink it, look, I wouldn't have greenlit Barbie at that script. What do I care they made it? They made it and they made money. Well, good for them, I guess. I'm not going to see the damn thing. I don't care. But a leftist, if the Barbie movie had been reversed, if it had been some, Christian messaging thing, you damn right the leftists would have said, "You can't release this movie," right? Yeah. So that's the difference. That's cancellation. So don't try to see, you're trying to make this thing like, oh, well, people get canceled on the left and the right. Nah, it's not quite the same. You leave the right alone, they'll just go off and do their own thing. Why? Because they have the upper hand. They live in reality, and leftists don't. So when leftists get frustrated, they're forced to go after the right, because how else are they going to propagate their ideology and whatever else they're doing? Oh, you have to support this movie, or racism wins, or misogyny wins. That's been the message for years, especially coming out of Hollywood. Oh, only bigots didn't go see this movie. Oh, I better go see it. I don't want to be a bigot. But it doesn't actually translate into very many sales. Yeah, as the handful of people who are easily intimidated by that probably were going to go see the damn movie anyway. I refuse to see a movie when somebody talks to me like that. And I think there are a lot of people or more people who aren't intimidated and in fact resent that kind of tact that won't go see a movie. I boycotted a whole bunch of celebrities and movies, and I won't go see them because I'm not going to go see Ezra Miller in anything. The song and dance he would have to do to get me to see him in a movie, that's going to be quite a song and dance. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't even seen an apology from that dude. Or whatever he is. Anyhow, continuing. Even now, if you look, you will see that there is leftist criticism of Barbie movie. Of course, leftists will criticize everything, including leftism. Most of what it falls down the movie being a feature-length ad for Mattel product first, with some progressive themes in the plot as an added bonus. What exactly did you expect from a Barbie movie? Did you expect the Barbie movie to open and say, whoa, wait a minute. Before we get to the movie, we have to tell you all these important messages. No, that's not. It's the character is the toy. So the idea, see, the framing of your whole sentence, like, oh, well, see, the distinction is they made it about the product first. The character is the toy. How would you tell me how you'd roll out that movie without putting Barbie in it first? The movie's called Barbie. The whole movie's about a toy. Would you have a 10-minute lecture time from Greta Gerwig? Hi, I'm Greta Gerwig. Before we start with this movie, let me lecture you on feminism for 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm sure it would have gotten a lot of scores on Rotten Tomatoes that way. Continuing, most of the appeal of Barbie movie seems to lie with the liberal progressives and not the leftist progressives. You're both the same thing now. That's a distinction without a difference anymore. And you can read The Suicide of the Liberals if you want to know what's going on with the liberals. The liberals are either out of the leftist camp because you drove them out with your relentless criticism of everything, or they are your bees, basically. They will do whatever you want because please just leave me alone. I want to support everything you say. But again, they're so dejected and demoralized because you criticize everything relentlessly, including them. So read the suicide of the liberals. It's called. It's an amazing essay, quite shocking, quite frankly, and I don't say that lightly. Continuing, that plus all of the girl boss feminism types, and aren't many of them, the kind of person who would push more woman drone pilots as genuine social progress. That's you, leftist. Oh, that's you. You may think, oh, that's not me. I draw the line there. Where's the line? Where's the line, leftist? You know, maybe you're an anti-war leftist. I don't know. But the problem with anti-war leftist, a lot of people on the left at some points in history, and I kind of remember this era, you know, the hippies. I was around during the late era of the hippies when they were getting older in the 70s, and a bunch of them just abandoned the whole shebang because it wasn't cool anymore. And there were still some who went, no, I'm going to continue to live on a commune and a compost and, you know, peace and love, man. And those guys were cool, even if they believed in a bunch of wacky stuff I didn't believe in. At least they weren't hurting anybody. So if you're one of those leftists, I guess, sure, good for you. Live on a commune and keep composting and make your own clothes and beer and all that good stuff. That's a good life, I think. If you're making your own stuff and you're living a wholesome life, even if you're a leftist, you're not hurting anybody and you're not trying to impose your will on anybody, good for you. But that's not really leftism as I understand it, or as it is now. Leftism today is a bunch of authoritarian asshats who want everybody else to live just like them. They want oh, you're hurting the environment. You have to live like me. Oh, you're hurting people's feelings. You have to talk and think like me. No. No, we all have to get along in this world. And look, I was around in the 70s when there are a lot of wackadoos running around. You cannot imagine them today because we have the internet. And people are constantly paranoid about being put on the internet for their wacky views or wacky points or whatever. But there were people who were desperate to be heard with their wacky ideas. And they were very spicy, some of them. And once in a while they'd get in a print and you'd pass it around and go, look at this maniac. But for the most part, they would kind of burn themselves out or go off into a little corner of West Bumble F, and you'd never hear from them again. And as long as they didn't hurt anybody, who cares? And there's a handful of nut jobs. There's always a handful of nut jobs that did terrible things, but for the most part, they just toddle off to some corner of the universe. You'd never hear from them. Today, we are connected by the internet, and as you correctly state in this, everybody has a megaphone. They probably shouldn't all use it. And I would prefer that they all did if we could have some kind of discussion back and forth. And I appreciate you being polite and posting your comment and not, you know, I don't mean to insult you or anything. I'm just having fun here. This is part of my channel. But I appreciate you putting a thoughtful comment on it, even though I obviously disagree with everything you said. So ultimately, what's the point here? I don't know. I mean, I don't think you should be a leftist. I think you should really think about things, especially the whole anti-capitalist thing. It just can't possibly work. My suggestion would be to go to Mises.org, read some stuff about capitalism, about how it actually works. Yes, we have a lot of crony capitalism today. There's a lot of corruption in the system, and a lot of people running around I don't like. I'm sure you don't support Biden because you're a leftist, but I bet you voted for him anyway. But who knows? Stay true to yourself, I guess. And in terms of movies, well, you don't even watch movies, so I don't know why you really care about my opinions on movies on Hollywoke Hot Take Live. But in terms of Barbie, I saw it as a 90-minute commercial for a toy. I said that in my, I think, analysis of the trailer months and months ago. I also said that about Air, the Michael Jordan shoe movie, or the movie I called Shoe. It's fine if you want to make the world a better place, but if I were you, I'd seriously consider getting out of the leftism paradigm, because making the world a better place is a lot more complicated than just jumping onto a political ideology and riding it into a ditch, as many, many, many leftists have. And leftism always ends with the same thing. It ends with a giant mountain of skulls and like, oh, this wasn't real leftism. This wasn't real communism. We didn't expect this to happen. You're never going to change human nature. And that's why you need objective metrics. Objective metrics are needed for movies, for everything else. So objectively, you need to be able to judge something. The only way you can do that is have some sort of rules, some sort of standard. Now, will we always live up to that standard? No. No, and some people would cheat the system. I mean, look at what Biden's doing right now. Political. But, we need something. I mean, if you can tell me your leftist standards, or where they exist, where they're written down, what most leftists agree with, that are actual hard metrics, that how people can be judged rather than your feelings this week or that, well, then that's a different story. Then that's something we could objectively discuss and compare, your objective metrics with mine and say, okay, well, that objective metric doesn't seem to work, or does seem to work, or maybe I can adjust mine, that kind of thing. So get some objective metrics, I would say. And that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Thanks for tuning in to this, I think, interesting, I guess you'd call it a discussion. Anyhow, if you've got more comments, leave them in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video about it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.